What's going on, guys? This is Looking Ahead to Beto Days. I'm your host, Chris, and we've got all sorts of stuff to dive into today. So let's get right into it. We're going to start with a little bit of Beto news. Beto had an incredible weekend in South Carolina, which saw him own the stage at Jim Clyburn's Fish Fry. Beto talked from the heart and about all of the people he had met and what he had learned, specifically naming Robert Smalls. He had met with the Gullah Geechee people prior, and he went down there and he went through all the sites. These people don't get a lot of attention on a national stage, but one of the most specific things that I saw from that was he visited the grave of Robert Smalls. For those of you who don't know, Robert Smalls was a slave who escaped in the most daring fashion possible. He stole a Confederate ship and sailed it out of Charleston Harbor, like right past Fort Sumter. He had to go through all the motions just to make them, because he couldn't like necessarily hide his ship, because the Confederates would have known what was happening. So he played like he was a real Confederate ship, got past Fort Sumter, and then sailed a Confederate ship right at Union lines. They eventually waved the white flag. He gets taken aboard, and I believe what he said was, I've commandeered this ship for Uncle Abe. That's not even just the craziest thing about him. After the war, he ran for Congress, and he actually became a representative. He doesn't get talked about as much, but he's a really important guy. You should definitely look him up. Some of the most impressive stuff that Beto had from that was and was said about Beto was from James Clyburn himself. Clyburn said that he had an immense amount of respect and praise for Beto. He actually detailed the story where John Lewis held a sit-in on the floor of Congress, and they didn't know if they could do it. So they were all down there, and they didn't know what was going to go on. And Beto came up, and he brought some cameras, and with these cameras, he started live feeding it on Facebook. And when he started live feeding it on Facebook, they got a lot of attention. So a lot of people who were online and saw this said that you guys stay where you're at. We're going to come down there. And a lot of people showed up on the lawn. This is some of the hard work that Beto has done, and this shows how much respect he has within Congress himself. Like I said, he had a pretty strong weekend, and he followed that Friday up with an absolute fire speech at the South Carolina Democratic Convention. Prior to the convention, he actually had a meetup where he got with some volunteers and some Beto supporters. Not when, if you're a supporter, you're a fan. Let's be serious. And he led these supporters down to the convention hall. He led them through the building, down an escalator, flags waving, chanting. And then they walked right into the floor, right through all of the people. And instead of going on stage, Beto pulls out a chair, he stands on it, and he gives an absolutely amazing speech. It was a rousing speech from the floor, where everybody was on their feet afterwards. It was amazing. If you haven't seen it, go and look it up. It is definitely good stuff. But with that kind of weekend, how do you top that? And with Beto, you do it by dropping a new policy plan, and that's what he did on Monday. He dropped a policy plan that seeks to take care of our veterans. I'm not going to go into detail on that right now, just because we're going to do a whole episode on it. It's a really, really good policy. You should definitely look into it. It's packed full of stuff that's going to take care of our veterans, and it'll deter any future wars that may come up. But a weekend like that makes for an entire episode, or just on its own. But I mean, he was busy. He was crushing it. That being said, today's topic of discussion is Beto's voting rights policy plan. I'm gonna, like always, I like to lead you guys off with a Beto quote, because who says it better than the man himself? So Beto is quoted as saying, "Ours is a government for the people and by the people." Yet when it comes to that quintessentially democratic act, people voting, the numbers tell a different story. For decades, tens of millions of people have been disenfranchised by law or practice. Many have not voted, not because they love our democracy any less, but because they have been literally drawn out of it. And that specifically speaks to gerrymandering lines. And this plan is extremely comprehensive. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this piece by piece. And the way I do that, and you guys might hear pages flipping, it's because I actually take the policy plan and go through it page by page to make sure you guys get it detailed to you. So we're going to jump right into that, and I'm pulling this straight from his policy on the page. Beto firmly believes that who casts the ballot is every bit as important as who is on the ballot. He basically unveiled a 3-part plan to increase voter registration by 50 million voters and raise voter turnout to a historic 65%. The reforms will seek to have 35 million new voters cast ballots in 2024. That's a really big deal. It's a lot of people. And just to think that many people in the greatest democracy in the world aren't represented, it's a real travesty. But I'm gonna go through the 3 prongs real fast. Number 1 is he wants to increase participation in our democracy by growing the ranks of eligible registered voters and limiting permanent incumbency to inspire a new generation of Americans to run for office. Number 2, he wants to remove barriers within our democracy by making it easier for everyone to make their voices heard. And number 3, he wants to rebuild confidence in our democracy by aggressively confronting interference in our elections and building confidence in our institutions, so Americans have faith that our electoral process represents their interests, not those of corporations, special interests, or foreign powers. Obviously, this is coming on the heels of 2016, where we had massive interference. Whether some people want to believe it or not, it is fact. It has been detailed. They 100% interfered with our election. We're going to start with the increasing the participation in our democracy. Like I said, Beto is going to pursue a plan to register at least 50 million additional voters. And he doesn't care. He doesn't care if they're Democratic, Republican, or independent. He just wants to make sure everybody has their voice heard equally. One of the more controversial parts, but I personally agree with this, is the limiting the permanent incumbency that defines so much of our system. If you think about it, Strom Thurmond, who lived to be like 100, he was a career politician. He ran for president in 1948 and lived to the early 2000s, and he was still in office in Congress. That shouldn't happen. So kind of what he wants to do is he wants to limit, much like the U.S. president has 2 terms. He wants to limit the senators to 2 terms, or 12 years. The House members to 6 terms or 12 years, which is what he did when he was representative in Congress. And he wants to limit the Supreme Court to 18 years for the Supreme Court, after which the justices would be permitted to serve on the Federal Court of Appeals, which that makes sense to me. That's going to be the hard part. That's going to be the much more difficult part to sell. But he also wants same-day voter registration. It's simple, effective, and secure, and is actually currently working well in 20 states, plus the District of Columbia. He also wants to ensure that young people are registered to vote. This is a real problem. I mean, I've talked to people in stores, like young people working, and they want to get active and they want to get involved, but they just don't know how to get registered to vote, and they don't necessarily have people to tell them, or that they need to register to vote. So Beto wants to ensure any automatic voter registration plan also includes pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. if you're registered to vote when you're 17, whether you can vote or not, it ensures that when you turn 18, you actually have the ability to vote when you can. He also wants to mobilize high schools, vocational schools, colleges, and universities to play their part in amplifying the next generation's voice at the ballot box. By registering students, encouraging participation, and providing campus vote coordinators. I remember seeing when I'm an Old Dominion University alumnus, I do remember seeing people out there, but not enough. There's not enough emphasis on making sure that college students are registered to vote. He also wants to remove barriers within our democracy. He wants to introduce legislation amending Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act to make clear that even seemingly race-neutral election regulations are unlawful when they result in disproportionate impact on racial minorities. And he wants to redirect resources at the Department of Justice towards robust, aggressive enforcement of current laws protecting all of our voting rights. If you look at the election that took place in Georgia, there was absolutely, that was an unfair election. You had 3-hour lines, you had voting machines that were never pulled out, and these were mostly in districts with people of color. That hurts our democracy when not everybody gets to use their voice. He also wants to crack down on draconian voter ID laws. He wants to work with Congress to pass legislation that allows people without identification to vote with a sworn written statement of identity. If you can use your if you can use your ID to buy a gun, you should be able to use your ID to vote. Plain and simple. That should be across the board. Bang, boom, done. He wants to prevent politically motivated state officials from purging the voter rolls to game the system. So if you have somebody who hasn't voted in a few years, you shouldn't be able to have your right taken away from you just because you haven't used it, right? It's unfair, and it's being used in a system to purge political opponents. He wants to invest in human-centered voter design that expands vote by mail and early voting and makes National Voting Day a national holiday, which it should be. Everybody should be able to get out and vote regardless of their job. That's plain and simple. That should be something we've been doing forever. He wants to provide federal resources to facilitate voting by mail. So if you're out of state or you go to college in Colorado and you can't fly home to, say, Virginia to vote, you can do that by mail. And he wants to work with Congress to pass legislation preventing states from limiting those who can vote by mail. And he also wants to extend early voting to 2 weeks, including weekends before Election Day, just to make sure everybody gets their voice heard, plain and simple. At the end of the day, that's what this is all about. He also wants to start placing polling stations at grand, iconic locations near public transportation, places that people can get to easily so that they can actually go out there. If you have to take 6 or 7 buses to go out to vote, it's going to be a pretty big deterrent. It makes it harder for you to get and do what you need to do. He wants to improve voting accessibility for individuals with disabilities by addressing issues with poll worker training and physical barriers to access. If you're in a wheelchair, there should be a ramp. Plain and simple, you should be able to manipulate the line just as easily as somebody who wasn't disabled. And he also wants to make it easier for voters to be educated and informed. When you go to vote, you should know who you're voting for. You should know their policies. And I know that's in many cases that's on the voter. But if you could go to one place as opposed to having to go to everybody's website, you'll have more educated voters. That makes sense to me. He wants to start funding civic education grants and piloting efforts to interact with and pre-mark ballots. Then he wants to rebuild confidence in our democracy. I kind of touched on that a little bit earlier with the whole Russia thing, the whole idea that Russia was even able to interfere with our elections is just mind-blowing to me. It shouldn't happen, but since it did, he wants to take the steps to make sure that it doesn't ever happen again. He wants to improve our election infrastructure and aggressively tackle interference in our elections. And he wants to align their systems with cybersecurity standards, invest in paper ballot systems, and perform risk-limiting audits to confirm election outcomes. He wants to require online platforms to disclose sponsors of political ads as well on their sites. If there's a political ad on your site, you should know where it came from. If you're looking at something, you should know the source so that you know that it's verified, and then you know it's a solid source. There's a lot of disinformation that happened during the 2016 election, that whole election. The investing in paper ballot systems, that makes sense to me too. I had also heard him talk about wanting to have receipts after you vote, which can be problematic if you have somebody, I mean, my wife made the example of an abusive situation. Abusive situation meaning like a husband is abusive and he wants his wife to vote a certain way. So if she doesn't and he has proof of it, he can abuse her. That's specifically what I mean. But I feel like there's got to be ways around that. You need to know that your vote went to where you cast it, and that's plain and simple. One of the biggest things, and it's a big topic right now in our country, is gerrymandering. For those of you who don't know what gerrymandering is basically where politicians draw their districts so that they can have the people that they want in their district, so that they get elected every time. He wants to end that so that each American's vote should count equally. He wants to enact legislation that empowers independent commissions for redistricting to ensure the makeup of districts that the makeup of districts reflect the preferences of voters statewide. You shouldn't have a district that is like a rectangle and then a line. That doesn't flow well. One, and it's cherry picking. It takes people who want to have their voice heard equally out of it. And he wants to protect the accuracy of the census, and he can do that simply by eliminating the citizenship question on the census. The last piece that we're going to go through is he wants to get money out of politics. We all know that Beto is not taking money from PACs. He's completely funded by us, the people. But that's not everybody, and it should be. He wants to end the inappropriate influence of political action committees by banning PAC contribution to campaigns, limiting contributions to issue PACs, inaugural committees, and post-retirement foundations to $2,000. And he has on here that he wants indexed with inflation. He wants to require PACs to disclose all donors at any amount, support low dollar contributions by providing a match for contributions up to $500, and then make them tax deductible. I've donated to his campaign on a number of times. They've all been low dollar. So, a nice tax deductible would be kind of sweet, I'm not going to lie. He wants to bring transparency to corporate donations by requiring public companies, large private companies, and all government contractors to disclose all political contributions and federal lobbying efforts. He also wants to institute real-time transparency for donations of $1,000 or more by requiring disclosure within 48 hours. He wants to prevent U.S. companies with substantial foreign ownership from inappropriately spending money to affect our elections. And he wants to reduce contribution limits for political parties. Currently, a single donor can give more than $2.5 million to state and national committees of a political party. So basically, that makes it so the rich can skew what they want. You see that a lot with like the Koch brothers, and I know that everybody throws out George Soros. There's people on both sides of this, and there will be, but if we limit that, it won't continue to happen. And he's going to make sure that we have a government for the people. Like, we built this thing. That's what the Constitution, by the people. So to do that, he wants to hold monthly town halls, and he will encourage federal elected officials to do the same. He loves a good town hall, and his speech in South Carolina on Saturday was very much town hall-esque. He wants to ban federal lobbying by anyone who is in a federal elected office and prohibit senior staff from federal lobbying for a period equal to the time they were in such a role or 6 years, whichever is greater. He wants to ban anyone who is in a federally elected office or Senate-approved office or anyone reporting directly to them from working for or owning any part of an entity they regulated while in government. That makes sense, got a little bit of bias if you have something to gain out of it, but that's for a period equal to the time they were in such a role or 6 years, whichever is greater. He wants to prohibit members of Congress from accepting political contributions from companies representing a sector regulated by a committee on which the member sits. Rank and file employees, small businesses, and people who live in the member's district would obviously be exempt. That's pretty much the whole thing, and that's what the crux of our discussion is going to be for the day. So today for our discussion, I have two guests with me. First, I have Daniel Golden.
Hi guys, I'm Dan. I am a teacher. I'm a social studies teacher, 8th grade. And also special education. I am a father of two boys, 5 and 3, so I have my hands full. I'm very happy to be here to talk about Beto and about some issues of our day with voting.
And we also have Ashley Chera.
Hey y'all, I'm Ashley, and I'm a recently graduated law student, currently living in South Carolina, and have a little bit of a past in politics, but looking forward to starting a career in college athletics.
All right, very cool. So we're going to dive right into this, and we're gonna start off with same day and automatic voter registration. Now, Ashley, you have a little bit of experience with this kind of stuff. What are some of the drawbacks? Because Beto has referenced how successful it is in various states. What are some of the drawbacks that you can see from same day and same day registration? We'll get into automatic voter registration in a second.
I think some of the issues with same-day voter registration are predominantly administrative. I think the concept behind it can work really well and clearly is in several states. But in my experience visiting precincts, running campaigns, those are volunteers. They're not super well trained. When you are then adding the concept of same-day registration, that's a whole nother set of laws, a whole nother set of administrative capabilities that those people have to have. And then if it's the state that's going to kind of enforce those things, it's now a state financial issue too. So I think those are the predominant issues, and the little old ladies at my precinct probably aren't who I want registering people to vote.
That's a fair assessment. I mean, if you've got volunteers, they probably haven't been trained on that kind of stuff. But what if, how would, providing a little bit of extra money to actually train those volunteers, do you think that might be able to kind of alleviate that issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously adequate training across precincts in general is an issue that I've run across, is that even when it comes down to what can and can't be inside the voting room, they don't always have the right training or adequate training, as in my opinion. So yeah, if there's funding to do that, that's great. But again, from the state level too, you're now having to administer that across however many precincts there are in a given state, and even your general state level districts could have 8 precincts in them. So it gets a little complicated. Another issue would actually arise in split precincts as well, because then you have people from multiple localities and multiple districts voting in one precinct. So now you're dealing with a whole nother set of situations, something that Virginia specifically has quite a few of.
Very good. And Dan, you're a teacher, so especially in because you're up in New Jersey, do they teach civics in 8th grade? I know that's what they teach down in Virginia.
No, they would teach civics either in 7th grade, that's U.S. history, or in 10th or 11th grade. Mm-hmm. It's actually, I was thinking about talking about that later on. It's not an actual class in school. It's part of the curriculum. It's part of the actual history curriculum.
Okay.
And I think it should be a class in school, even if it's a couple 2 semesters, something the kids know what the importance of voting is, and, why they should vote. I try to impart that, and I taught world history this year. I try to tell kids, vote. If you can vote, vote. There's no, register, get yourself out and vote.
Now, I do the same thing as a sixth grade teacher. Even with my sixth graders, I tell them, guys, you need to get out and vote. I think we're 100 years out from women getting the right to vote.
Exactly.
So that's gonna bring us to the automatic voter registration. With automatic voter registration, basically, this plan would automatically register voters at 16 or 17 so that when they turned 18, if they had the election the next day, they'd be able to vote. How functional do you think that is? And as a teacher, knowing kids, do you think that would increase the number of voter turnout? And if so, or I mean, if not, why?
I don't know why it wouldn't be functional. If it's something that's done beforehand, I know Ashley just talked about the issues with same day. This is assuming, obviously 2 days is the minimum, but I was born in July and I voted in November. So that gives the state, a couple, or county, town several months to figure this out. I think it would increase turnout in the sense that it gives kids something less to do. It says, hey guys, you're registered at 18, go and vote. I'm not saying it would increase it exponentially, but I think there seems to be no harm in making it easier, especially this generation. You work with kids. They like to do the bare minimum. So if I say to the kids, hey guys, you can go vote in November or in May, whatever the next election is you want to vote in, you're ready to go.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I push it with my kid. Like I said, I push it with my kids. My partner that I teach with also does the same thing. And I think it offers them a pathway. If they know that they can automatically go out and vote, and not have to do anything, we'd get a few more people out to vote, especially if we put in that importance. And another part of this plan that I mentioned it earlier on in the podcast, getting out more educational materials about who candidates are. I think that would help them a lot, as opposed to having everything everywhere, have everything in one concise place. Now, Ashley, having worked in legislation around all of that stuff, do you think the amount of information you get about candidates is adequate, or do you think that we're really kind of muddying the waters by having everything from every different direction, and people are only going to get things from what they know per se, and like why or why not?
I think that when you're getting information direct from a candidate, that's generally your best set of information. And so I think that's one thing Beto has actually done really well, is get his information to his audience. And it's something that gives even kids, if you want to call them that, the opportunity to break down, do I support or do I not support these people? I mean, they're the ones who are going to be representing me. How do I feel about them as individuals? And then how do I feel about their policies? I think one of the really interesting things about the potential of an automatic registration is the ability to even move that conversation into schools. Not the political he said, she said into schools, but the concept of how do I look at this and determine who I want to support, how I want to support them, and what my options are. So it's just an additional opportunity.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, Beto has done that really, really well. You're actually kind of lucky. You're down in Columbia, so you were 5 minutes from where he led the march down to the Democratic National Convention that I mentioned earlier, and that was a big deal. He really, really blew that place up. Now,
can I add on to that real quick?
Go ahead.
I actually, when I read over Beto's page, I was thoroughly impressed. I actually read a couple of the people, the front runners, and he blew me away. It actually reminded me of a well-written paper. He made his points and he expanded on it. And that's something candidates need to think about, is having their sites up, maybe having an app, getting on TV. I know Beto's on TV a lot. I know Buttigieg is on TV a lot. Getting out there to get your points across, whether it's written, YouTube, Snapchat, Instagram. And I know Beto's on Instagram a lot. I do follow him. But that's something candidates need to do to get themselves out there, and it's hopefully something we see going forward.
Yeah, you're seeing
what's going on.
Yeah, you're seeing a big social media push with him. I actually volunteer for him on his social media, and obviously I've started this. But he's really, really good about getting his information out to people, if it's either by town halls or by his web pages in the internet. I mean, he's really, really, really pushed it. So let's get into let's take this a little bit in a different direction. Let's talk about voter registration purges. A lot of times they are, there's the argument that they're racially done because it's in a lot of cases it's very very hard to get somewhere to vote. Or like in the case of Georgia, there were 3-hour lines. People in poorer neighborhoods aren't going to be able to wait 3 hours because they have to get back to their jobs. How do we fix that? Like, what in our system? How do we fix people from purging people who haven't voted? Which I don't understand. I think it's extremely unfair. You don't, lose your right to vote just because you haven't done it in a year or 2 years. Is there any particular reason that they do that of, Ashley?
No, and I've heard, I actually did a little research after I read Beto's website on exactly what he was referencing, because it's not something that comes up very often, and I think it's something that probably people don't want to talk about because it's hard to get around. Why are you doing this if you're not doing it for a backhanded reason? So it's genuinely just not something that you hear discussed very often. I can't come up with a reason why you would do it. Maybe people throwing out just takes names off the list, it's less to go through, but I just don't see that as a viable reason. If you haven't done something to lose that right, if you haven't committed a felony, etc., and that's a whole different topic, then why are you being removed from the rolls? Just because maybe you've missed an election, forgot to send in your absentee ballot, whatever it was.
Yeah, no, and I know you mentioned felons and them losing their right to vote.
Yeah.
I'm kind of that's a really really hot button issue. It's very hotly talked about. We have a penal system that is supposed to be about reform, but it's not complete reform, because if you commit a crime, you go and do your time and you come back out, why do you still not have? Why are you still not allowed to vote? You're supposed to be a citizen, and we want you to come back and function as such. Especially with the racial disparity in the penal system, it seems to me again that it's racially based, and that's an issue. Like where are you at on that, Dan?
So to answer the first question about the purges, I think it's racially based. There's no good reason other than racial and to try to win an election. Why is Brian Kemp, who's running for governor, in charge of that situation? Like the owner of a team refereeing a game. It's something that's not right there. That's a different story, but Georgia, you can talk that later, it's fine, but Georgia really bothered me, how he was able to win the election and literally disenfranchise so many people. As for the prison issue, I know as Florida, out of all states in this union, voted to give felons back the rights to vote. I think another state might have also, but they're trying to pass laws to stop that from happening. At some point people have to say, why is our elected leaders, whatever party they might represent, why are they making laws to stop people from doing their constitutionally allowed right? Whether you're black, white, immigrant who's now a citizen, it's your right to vote. Whether you miss an election, whether you're a felon, if you do your time, you get out, you get to vote. One thing I'm sort of on the fence on, but not really, is I don't think criminals in prison should have the right to vote. I think you commit a crime, you need to do that time and lose that right. Maybe if you're a low-level offender, I can see that, but like if you're do something egregious, felony, you should not be allowed to vote while in prison.
I can agree with that. I'm kind of there too. You have all of your other rights stripped, so you end up in a situation. You did a crime. You need to do the time. Again, it can be functional, if low level offenders, or it can vary. I mean, but that's going to be very, very difficult. Now I'm gonna change directions a little bit here, and one of Beto's big things is he doesn't take PAC money. He takes money from us. His entire campaign is by the people, for the people. He gets out in town halls. He's talking. Every policy that he's put out isn't based off of, I think this is what a corporation wants me to do. It's what people are saying. It's what they're telling him. He's taking stock in this. He doesn't take polls because that doesn't help him. What helps him is us. He wants to talk to everybody. That's why he went to all 254 counties in Texas. That's a huge deal. That's a lot of work.
And he still lost, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yes. But I mean, he changed the way that politics are run in Texas, and he's changing the way politics are run in America. So like, where are we at on these PACs where they're putting all this money in? Like, how do you get that money out, Dan?
I wish I knew the answer to that question. It's something that's bothered me for several years. I don't think corporations, I don't think rich people should have a say in our government more than we have a say in our government. You shouldn't have a president who's giving wealthy people cabinet positions who are clearly not qualified, and it's not just DeVos. I other than a constitutional amendment, I know the Citizens United ruling really hurt our democracy. Unfortunately, until there's a more liberal, more moderate Supreme Court, it's going to be a problem. You're not going to pass a law. You need to have likely have a Democratic Senate and a Democratic President and a House. It just seems like unless the politics change and different people get into office, it's going to be almost impossible. And it's a shame that the minority controls what goes on in this country.
No, and I can agree with that. And that's something that's bothered me too, because you constantly see something come across the Senate desk, and it's immediately it's shot down by McConnell for whatever reason. Yeah,
do your job.
I'm pretty sure. No, it's good. It's good. I mean, the man has a 30% approval rating in Senate. He's the lowest, has the lowest approval rating of anybody in Congress. That says enough. We don't really need to expand on that. But actually, having worked campaigns, how much of a problem did you see the PACs becoming? How much influence did you see with people putting in buying politicians?
It was really interesting because I had a very, I think, rainbow view of like, oh, PACs aren't a problem when I first started, but they are a problem. And I think there's a place for them. There's a place for the kind of coming together of individuals who want to stand for certain issues. And that's where PACs can really, really play an influence, especially with just the general getting out there, getting information to everyone. However, the money is where the major issue is. And I agree, Citizens United has definitely played a major role in this, because now you have the big PACs are now super PACs. And so now you see just thousands and thousands, even at the state level, you have hundreds of thousands of dollars rolling in for state level campaigns. And that's crazy when it should be the people speaking. So I definitely think they're a problem. I don't know that a complete and total ban on PAC money is necessarily the way to go, because some people don't want to donate directly to candidates and would rather kind of circumvent through issue-specific topics. But I think they're a problem and they need to be limited. I have no clue how you would do that, but I do think a severe limit on PAC money at all levels, federal, state, everything is needed.
Yeah, no, I think that's like individuals can donate like $2.5 million to a candidate, which is just absolutely absurd, because
Right.
it's almost like you're buying that politician. And as far as people not feeling comfortable donating directly to a candidate, I mean, maybe people should educate themselves on a candidate a little bit more. Like I have watched Beto specifically since Texas. Like I had said, if he announces for president, I'm supporting him. I love what this guy's doing. He's doing great stuff.
And I think that's really cool. And I think Beto's changing things. I think you're completely right. Beto's changing the way people look at politicians. But in the current sphere where I'm sitting here going, I don't align with any of these guys, it's easier for me to say, well, I support this issue, so let me go to this organization. And I think that's the shift we need to start making, is back to candidates that are truly listening, and that you have to limit that money. So they're all interconnected.
There are websites out there like one of those, I forget that, they Move On, other sites that they educate you on the candidates and give money to certain causes.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the name of the site, and I apologize. I'll try to get to you, Chris. That they, once a primary candidate's been declared, the money goes to that candidate. So even if you're not sure, you want to put money to you want to defeat the current president. You might like Beto if he doesn't win, or he does win. If you like Warren, she loses, he wins. The money goes to the candidate who's going to challenge the president next year. That's a
good point.
Like that.
Oh yeah. No, that's that I totally get where you're coming from. I think a lot of it comes when you have things like the NRA putting money into something and putting a ton of money
What money?
into
What money? They have no money left.
it's a fair assessment. So we're gonna drive this conversation further, and now we're gonna talk about something that has been a real issue, and again is racially motivated, and again it's causing a real problem, and it's disenfranchising people, and that's gerrymandering. Ashley, can you give us a rundown of exactly what gerrymandering is?
Yeah, so districts for your state level and federal level districts are redrawn every 10 years after the census. When this happens, in many cases still today, those are drawn either for a specific party, but underneath that is generally it's race-based. So even when you're claiming that it's to keep an incumbent in office, usually speaking, there is a racial tactic there, and most states still allow their state legislatures to draw these districts. Just as an example, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the House gets together every 10 years and redraws these districts. Obviously, they've had some major issues recently in the Supreme Court, and they redraw them, and generally speaking, you end up with these incumbent-proof districts that are impenetrable. So usually based on race. I will say Virginia did a couple years ago, back when I was still in college, attempt a redistricting committee, got college students involved. I was involved in that. We all used computer-based programs to redraw the districts. Some absolutely fantastic ideas came out of that. There are a couple of states that are doing that now and using just straight up numbers. But it's a really interesting phenomenon, and it's really sad that we're still dealing with it, but there are other options out there.
Oh yeah, like 100%. It's an issue when you have a district that is like a little bit of a square and then wraps around to the other side of a district. Like, how does that happen? Like, who's drawing
like
these, man? Yeah, it looks like which is kind of where gerrymandering comes from. Dan, you can give us a bit of a different perspective because you're up in Jersey, and I mean, having lived there for 2 years myself, I don't know much about the districting. Do you have a real issue with gerrymandering up there, and like where do you?
No.
Where do you stand?
We don't. I'm not the expert in gerrymandering like Ashley is. But New Jersey is a very blue state, and it has been for several. Even though we had a Republican governor for 8 years, most of our state senators, most of our Congress people are Democrat. I'm not saying you want to have all Democrats, obviously, but actually a couple of Democrats just won in red districts in New Jersey. But gerrymandering is not really a problem here. But I do want to plug our friends at Crooked Media. They're a podcast empire, and they started a site called, I'm going to use my curse now, called Fuck Gerrymandering. And they're trying to get out, trying to stop this problem, trying to figure out, how we go about, eliminating the racist practice of gerrymandering. Obviously, as you mentioned this, you need to have nonpartisan organizations doing it, not Republican Democrats, because even Democrats, I think, gerrymander too, to a certain point.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's trying to get an advantage one way or another.
We're not perfect, but like I said, you don't want to have the owners roughing the game. Like, you need to have fair and balanced, what Fox News used to be. So, just kidding. But that's basically what you need to have. Nonpartisan, and hopefully the organizations like Crooked Media, blank gerrymandering, they get the job done, and they hopefully get rid of this problem in our democracy.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, it's a real problem when we have so many people who should be allowed to vote, who can't vote, or just have problems getting to the polls. I mean, part of Beto's plan is, making them easy to get to. People aren't going to, ride the bus and have to take 6 or 7 different stops and switches, train switches, bus switches, whatever. They have to, voting should be convenient.
Chris, one thing, did you mention about him? He want to make a national holiday, Election Day?
Oh yeah, no. I had mentioned that earlier in my intro before I brought you guys on. It should be 100%. There's no reason it shouldn't be.
The biggest bullshit that McConnell thinks that too many holidays. Well, give it to Columbus Day. Like, what did that man? That man raped and killed innocent people.
Yeah, I have many feelings on Christopher Columbus. That's an whole episode on its
Oh,
on
I'll
its
see you
own.
then.
I teach sixth grade social studies, and he always comes up, and I'm always like, oh, guys, we need to let me tell you some other things. So something else that's been a real an issue, and it's still in the discussion, and especially like right as we were coming on to start recording, it was just announced that Special Counsel Mueller is going to meet in an open forum in front of two of the committees, and that is election security. 2016, Russians interfered in our election. There's no doubt about that. Whether certain people want to believe that, that's on them. You know, the facts are the facts. You can't alter. There's no such thing as alternate facts. Let's just leave it at that. So what do you think, Dan? What do you think what would you do? You're in charge. You're the guy. How do you make our election more safe?
You mean from the outside, like the Russians, the foreign countries who come in and they buy ads or they troll forums, stuff like that?
Yep, that stuff.
Got to invest some money. You got to figure out a way to keep it out, to block, to be able to read when it's a troll, when it's real. Again, limiting the money that comes in, and also admitting it was a problem. Our president has not admitted, or he did by accident and took it away, that Russia interfered with our election. I didn't read the Mueller report from front to back, but what I've seen, that he laid out that Russia systematically interfered in our election. It's obvious. The fact that, Mr. McConnell, when the FBI and Obama came to him, said, "You go up public with this, I'm going to cry, I'm going to scream murder." That's a problem. When our leaders try to hide what's going on, that's a threat to our democracy.
Oh yeah, no, 100%.
Listen, I understand, McConnell wants a Republican, but to sacrifice our democracy, our country, to elect somebody is a shame. And we have to, we have to admit it. We have to invest in it. We have to figure out, and be diligent.
100%. So, when you were, and Ashley, you probably worked the polls, and actually Virginia does a pretty good job with this. When we go in to vote, we do paper forms. We bubble in, which is awesome. But that's not the norm. If you can have somebody. Yeah, that can be an issue, and that's something that actually Beto is pushing forth. His plan covers a lot of these different things, especially like troll farms. You have to tell where your ad comes from. So Ashley, you've heard kind of what Dan would do. Like how would you handle the issue of election security?
I'm actually a huge fan of the paper form idea. There are several precincts across both South Carolina, where I am now, and Virginia, that do allow the electronic voting. And I think just the straight up fear of it being hacked is a real thing. And we've experienced it. We know what can happen. And admitting that, moving forward and saying, okay, fine, we've been doing it on paper for years. Why does it matter? Why do we need to use electronics? It works, it counts it. It may take a little bit longer, but if that's the most secure that we can make things, let's make it secure and let's get it done. Because the last thing any American should have to worry about is whether or not somebody from a foreign country is influencing their vote. That's ridiculous.
No. Oh yeah, 100%. Like they shouldn't have to worry about that, and they shouldn't have to worry about votes being switched. I know in Texas there were some people who went in and they knew they put down O'Rourke as their vote, and it would switch to Cruz. That was a regular thing, and that's another thing that Beto is actually putting forth that I've heard him talk about it are election receipts. Now, the problem with the election receipts is if you have an election receipt, it kind of outs you as who you voted for a little bit. And, sometimes people know and sometimes they don't. But, when I was talking to my wife about it, she said, well, what if you have like an abusive situation? The husband wants the wife to vote a certain way. And if she's got this receipt on her, he knows. Like, how do you counteract that? Like, what are your thoughts on voting receipts?
Which one is that stuff for?
Yeah, whichever. You guys go with this one. This one's out. This is to the floor.
One thing I want to mention about Beto's policy and trying to answer that question is I've always voted electronically. I've always gone to machine, hit the button, and hit the cast vote. I'm not against the idea of paper. I know Beto wants to look at national voting, uniform voting. But one thing I hope that they do is, twice in Florida in the last 18 years, people have screwed this up. Make sure that it's easy to read, and you can't cast the wrong vote. I'm talking to you, Broward County. But I don't know. It's a hard question to answer, Chris, because you don't want to put somebody, no matter where you are, who you're with, your vote should be private. So if a receipt causes an issue, maybe we should be careful with that, or maybe the receipt shouldn't be made public if that's even possible.
Yeah, no, that's the hard part. Like I said, you have you have a situation where you have an actual piece of paper on you.
Yeah.
So
maybe Ashley's a better answer than I do on that one. I'm sorry.
Yeah. What do you think, Ashley? Let's see what you got to say.
I think it's an interesting concept, and I think it's definitely a way to kind of say, like, okay, this is I know that my vote was cast for who I wanted to vote for, but on the back end of that, say that your receipt came out and it said it was a different name. That's a whole nother system that needs to get set up, and how do we actually manage that the receipt that was printed was accurate? And do you see what I'm saying? It's kind of, we're taking this a whole step further, versus if we can limit interference and we can limit maybe even stricter laws with regards to people campaigning outside of precincts and things like that. So you're limiting that influence, so that people go in, they know who they're voting for, they vote, they leave, and we're done. I think there are other ways to secure it without necessarily having to put in this whole other set of systems with regards to a receipt.
I can agree with that. And as far as the campaigning outside of the voting booths, I don't know anybody who's ever gone in to vote that knew who they were voting for and then went, oh, well, that guy had a really great sign. I think he's pretty much sold me on this.
Is that illegal?
So I don't know why they're in there. They have it in Virginia. You have to be a certain distance away, so like they'll be outside.
Yeah.
Which
nothing can be inside the precinct.
I live in a boring state. I never have any lines. I never see people, holding signs up. New Jersey really sucks. Come on. Yeah. I need some. I mentioned that before, how I watch the news and I see hours of waits and I just can't understand it. Like I literally had maybe once a 5-minute wait.
Well, you have a lot of that. Like I said, in Georgia, 3-hour waits, and they had voting booths or voting machines in warehouses.
Yeah,
a lot of that's done on purpose. Mm-hmm. So that's how you end up with lines like that. Mm-hmm. So, all right. It's November. It's 2020. You're watching the election. Everybody's counting the Electoral College. Your candidate is winning in the popular vote, but they're losing in the Electoral College, and this is a big issue that we're seeing a lot of these candidates bring up. What do we do about the Electoral College? I mean, I understand why it was put in place. Honestly, if I'm speaking candidly, the founding fathers just assumed that Americans were, too stupid to make their own decisions. So the Electoral College is there. So, we don't have things happen where we elect a despot or somebody who's super unqualified. And we've seen how well that has worked. Obviously.
Fantastically, apparently.
Yeah, it is because we don't vote for vote for president. We vote for Electoral College. What do you guys think, Ashley? What do you think about getting rid of the Electoral College and just going popular vote? I can tell you the opposite argument to that is, well, you have a lot of really, really big cities, and just they're very in one spot. Like you've got New York, Philly, LA, all these big cities where there's a lot of Democrats. Mm-hmm. And they outnumber people like in Nebraska where there's nobody,
right?
Really. So I mean, I also kind of get it from that aspect. But I mean, what do you think? What do you think about getting rid of the Electoral College?
This is something I've struggled with for a really long time, because I understand the modern take on it is preventing that disparity in influence, but at the same time, I think getting rid of it altogether just creates, whoever the people vote for. I'd honestly like to see someone, and I'm probably not smart enough for this, but someone come forth with basically a redone version of the Electoral College. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think we need to account for the disparity of those high density population areas. But at the exact same time, at the moment, I'm leaning towards the popular vote. Like I'm so back and forth, but I see both arguments and I'm torn. I'm super torn.
Yeah, no, me too. I see the importance of it, and I think of both sides, and I'm like, man, this is just a really, really tough topic. And I agree with you. Maybe we just need to redo it, like think about how we're doing the electoral college. It's a really good point. Dan, what do you do?
I have some thoughts on this one.
Here we go.
I do agree. I do agree with what you both said, that there's reasons for it, and there's obviously people who aren't big city, East Coast, West Coast liberals. But you've had two elections the last 18 years, where the popular vote winner didn't become president.
And by like 3 million votes.
Well, I forget exactly what Bush was. I think it was less than 1 million. But the fact that you have a person in office, yes, 3 million votes, and you've had two justices confirmed. You've had a ton of appellate and district justices. They're basically destroying the court system. Creating these passing laws that people aren't popular. States are gutting. They're going after the Roe v. Wade. I know it's last week's. It's a problem that the majority of Americans are represented by the minority. There's a stat that I don't remember. I couldn't find it. That in a couple of years, like 20 states will represent like 70% of the population. So that's like 40 senators. It's a problem that you're going to have the majority living in condensed areas and not represented correctly. Elections have consequences. We're seeing them. If you're more modern, more progressive, you've had 4 justices confirmed in the last 16 years who are not friendly to your beliefs. It's a problem. So do you want to get rid of the electoral college? I would say yes, but I do agree with Ashley in the sense that maybe there's a better way. 3 million votes is not something to sneeze at. And I'm not buying his illegal immigrant BS. I should have said that word before. Great time for it. But there has to be, our people's like me, my voice is not being heard. It's being ignored. It's just something got to be done, like you said.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's just this one's a real. I backloaded the discussion with the really hot button topics because I wanted to make you guys think about it.
Getting me angry.
But yeah,
this could be a whole episode. This conversation. This could be a whole episode if you really wanted to do it.
Oh, I know. We could talk about electoral college all day, and we could also talk about our next topic all day, and that is term limits. We have term limits for presidents too. Obviously, that's been after FDR, they made it an amendment, I believe, and you get 2 term limits. But you can have career politicians in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. So in Beto's plan, he's presented, you get 6 terms as a representative, that's 12 years, and 2 terms as a senator, and that equals out to 12 years. And I think everybody, that's kind of like, I guess that kind of makes sense. But where a lot of people are kind of, diverting from this is the Supreme Court, because he wants to have term limits for the Supreme Court. And I'm going to read this to you specifically.
I forget how many years.
18-year terms for the Supreme Court, after which the justices would be permitted to serve on the Federal Court of Appeals. And I'm going to go right back to what you said. The court system has been absolutely skewed in the last 2 years by these judicial confirmations. So that creates an issue of long after the current administration is out of the White House, we still have blowback from judges who aren't qualified, judges who really like beer, and which isn't a problem.
And Squee.
I still like beer, and can't forget Squee. Not
Doggy Dog.
I'm sorry, I can't. That still cracks me up. But that's an issue, right? That's a given. In you've got people coming from all over. So we're going to kind of specifically stick to the Supreme Court. What kind of issues do you see as blowback from having a term limits on the SCOTUS, Ashley?
This one's really hard for me too, and I think that I'm a little bit jaded from the perspective of just graduating from law school, in that I feel very strongly that these justices have, worked their lives for this role. But at the exact same time, I see the flip side argument of this. This is why I never survived in politics, because I see both sides of everything.
Hey, that's the way everybody should be.
Exactly.
That's how you get bipartisanship is you see things both ways and you're able to make agreements. That's how our government should work.
It's work
not,
that way.
But it should.
So at the end of the day, I think, I don't know about the 18 years specifically, but I think after I thought about this for the last couple of days really hard, actually, I think at the end of the day, seeing some sort of term limit wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. While I love RBG as much as the
Hmm.
next law student, I,
The next human, come on, we all love her.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Everybody
What's
loves
not
her.
to love?
And I want to see her around for as long as humanly possible.
18 more months,
I,
come on.
yeah, exactly. At least that long. And I do see the need. I see the need for the turnover of justices. I think it would also help us work towards a streamlining of the confirmation process. And because you're going to see more turnover. So you're not just going to be waiting for people to die, as morbid as that is, you're not going to be waiting for it. So I think it could really help us get even better justices, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, at the end of the day, which is then going to just give us better rulings. So
Oh, a
um,
1,000%. Yeah, that's perfect. That's
I
exactly right.
I'm leaning more towards I'm okay with some sort of term limit. I think it needs to probably be at least 20 years.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And to another point, we definitely need there needs if a justice goes out, we need to make sure, like, I think, what was it, Scalia, who died, and they held that seat open for like a year. That
Yeah.
shouldn't have ever happened. That shouldn't be allowed. I think we need to fix that aspect of it as well. So Dan,
Hmm.
term limits, SCOTUS, where you at?
Yeah, I do tend to agree. Um, I don't necessarily agree with the House and Senate term limits because they are
Really?
voted in by people. I know in a non-gerrymandering world, the House, you could primary. Look at what AOC did, and I believe Kevin Cantor, is that the name, who got primaried in Virginia?
Mm-hmm.
Eric
Canner.
Cantor, Eric
Eric
Cantor.
Canner.
Yeah, so there's ways to primary, and if you don't like your own party, primary that person. Um, Unfortunately, I hope we can get rid of Mitch McConnell somehow and Lindsey Graham. But you're right. And I'm actually on board. I'll be on board with court packing to add two more judges, but that's just me. But there has to be a way to make it so you don't get on the court for too long, and maybe more presidents have a chance to nominate somebody. Just because you think about it, if you had an election for Supreme Court justices today, the majority would be more liberal, more moderate, not be
Uh,
conservative.
no, I agree. I
Yeah,
agree with
so
that.
it has to be. I don't know. And I don't know. I just feel like the judge system has been kind of warped or diluted, and so I would be on board term limits. 20 years sounds like a good number.
That's a pretty solid. It's a nice
Yeah,
round
it
number.
is.
Right. I thought
Hmm.
18 was random.
It was.
Yeah,
Yeah, I didn't. That's the one thing I didn't love about Beto's policy was his term limit. He didn't seem so. I don't want to say so clear, but it seemed to kind of rushed together. Like I guess
I
his.
he's definitely to that point. I know he's been putting it together
Yeah.
for a while, and I can tell you that where he got his number for the house
Mhm.
was because him and Amy, who is his wife, they sat down and said, "All right, well, how long are we going to do this?" And 12 years. That's what they decided. That's what they decided was a good amount. So that's actually that is coming from someplace. He's actually
Yeah.
that's not so random. The 18
Okay.
year terms, I have no idea.
Hmm.
I'm a round number guy myself, but hey,
Mhm.
to each his own. So I'm gonna present you guys with one more question, and I actually have something for Ashley specifically after I ask you this. After I ask you guys this next question. So Dan, you're gonna go first.
Okay.
What would a candidate have to do right now to secure your vote? I know you've mentioned that you're kind of in the Warren camp as it
Mhm.
stands,
Mhm.
but what is tell me what she's doing different?
Honestly, they're pretty similar. Mine is gender and 30 years of age or so. Um, I can't. I don't think I can pinpoint one thing. I do like Beto. I like him a lot. Part of why I'm more on her because she's on the rise and he's not so much on the rise. Um, Here's another the issue I have. I know we don't have time for this discussion. Is I don't like the primary process. I hate the caucus situation. I don't like that. Certain states have more power because they get to go first. I don't. My primary date is like June 4th or June 10th, so I might not have a say in this election. To me, it's a shame. I'm talking about disenfranchising. Um, there's nothing really that they can do
That's a really good point.
Yeah, like I'm gonna have like I can tweet stuff out. I'm not gonna start a podcast. I'm not gonna go on Twitter like you do, but like there's not much I can do other than playing a small part. So it's a shame. But really, like if the voting was tomorrow, I like Warren. I like that she has her plans, but student debt, and the policies are kind of the same. And I would love a Beto ticket. I could see him being groomed and running in 8 years, assuming she wins 2 terms. Listen, I like Beto, and when he ran for Senate, I liked him after he lost, and I like him now. But it's like really, it's hard for me to pinpoint exactly why I favor her more than I favor him.
But it sounds like you and I need to have a little bit more in-depth conversation. We can bring you over to the Beto side.
Well, like I said, you're wasting time on me if if in June's my primary and it's already a nominee.
But that's a fair point. I totally get.
That's part of my problem right now.
I totally get where you're coming from with that. So Ashley, I'm not sure 100% where you stand, but what would a candidate have to do right now to secure your vote?
Show me that they're going to actually be willing to be bipartisan. Coming from a background of being much more much more conservative in my younger days, and really having kind of really like just deep mental conversations with myself, and changing how I feel about certain things. I think that I want to see some bipartisanship. Having been in the legislature, it does truly help, even when you're dealing with some of the most polarizing issues, whether you want to talk about abortion or LGBTQ or voting rights or whatever it is you're talking about. When you're willing to have that conversation on both sides and have the discussion, that's when the best legislation comes out, and you rarely see it today. Hence why I'm not going really back into politics. Like this type of thing I'm totally down for, because I can talk and really rationalize and explain how I feel. So there's no one out there at the moment that's got me 100% or probably even 50%. But be willing to have the conversations. I love that Beto is having the conversations and putting plans out there. I am tired of politicians saying we need to change these things, but we can't get it yet. And gun rights is a major area where you see that happen. Yes, we know we need change, but we're not going to do anything. Beto is at the very least putting some stuff out there. Yeah, exactly. Putting things out there and saying, I have no idea if this is actually going to work, but this is my plan. This is how I would push to change things. And you're a step beyond everybody else at this point. So I have no idea what anybody would need to do specific policy wise, other than be willing to have those tough conversations and understand that we're a 2-party system for the time being, and we got to be able to work in that system.
And I completely agree with you. And here's your extra question, because
bonus round.
Oh, I feel left out.
Dun, 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 bonus round. So I know that you did a little bit of work with the Gullah Geechee people in South Carolina, and we had a conversation about that. I don't know much about them, and I know that's something that you had worked with your college on, and Beto actually went and just spoke with them. He went and he saw the grave of Robert Smalls, which I talked about earlier on before you guys came on. And I know that you said, man, I like seeing these guys get some kind of attention is just awesome. Like, tell me, how does that make you feel?
I think it really kind of stood out to me, because knowing the history of the Gullah Geechee in a way that I never intended to know, but knowing the true, honest to goodness disenfranchisement, as in no one even knows who they are. And then you have a presidential candidate who's willing to reach out. I mean, if that doesn't make you stop and go, wow, he's doing something different, I don't know what can. They're a really, really interesting group. There's so much history in the Gullah Geechee. So much of our nation is drawn back to them. Kind of brief note, the initial slaves in this country came in through South Carolina, and they were predominantly Gullah Geechee. They were the Gullah Geechee, what is now the Gullah Geechee Nation. So, our history's there. And so he's tying as far back as he can get, and wants these people's opinions. And I can't think of a single politician that's ever done that, except for maybe some local politicians here in South Carolina. So, it makes me really happy to see that specific group of people is getting a say and getting to have their voices heard and stand out a little bit because I think they have a lot to say, and honestly, a lot of really great ideas could come out of that community.
That's great, and that's one of the big things about Beto's campaign is that he wants everybody to be included, whether our views are different, whether we support Elizabeth Warren or we don't know who you
I do not support Beto. For. Chris, relax.
I'm not saying, I'm not pointing fingers or judging you. I'm just saying he wants to bring all of us in, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats, and that's what that's what it's all about. I want to close out. I want to say thank you guys for coming on. You guys have had some great conversations. This has actually gone on for quite a bit. I wanted to cut it off a bit ago, but we did this. It all came together. So I really appreciate you guys going on. You really drove the conversation. We really talked about some.
Sorry, Hannah.
Some very interesting things. But for right now, guys, if you're not volunteering for Beto, you can go to his website, host an event. We've got this will have gone up after the debates. Do some research on the debates after they come out. Push Beto's message. We have an FEC deadline coming on June 30th. You guys get out, donate, canvas, knock on doors, clipboard, hold meetups, hold events. But for right now, that's all. I'm Chris, and let's keep looking ahead to Beto days.